Welcome to the Humble Servant Podcast with Eric Velez. This is the show where we help men and women in public service transition to a career in the private sector. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and Eric and I are excited to bring you the very first Spotlight edition of the Humble Servant. Now, this is a little different, so Eric, tell us what a Spotlight edition is.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. Indeed, super excited about this one. Yeah, so when we were coming up with the concept of the podcast, we came up with some different types of shows. One would be where we bring in an expert in to talk about a specific area. And another type of an episode was what we call a spotlight episode, in which we would highlight a public servant who has made the transition successfully from public service into the private sector, and really to highlight them and to let them tell their story about that transition. There's so much that we can learn by just listening to others who have done it before us. Now, I'm super excited about our first Spotlight edition because when I went and looked for this person, I thought, okay, wouldn't it be great if we had somebody who was in the military and they served as a firefighter, or they were a police officer, and they had just this incredible dynamic diversity about their background. And so I found Zachary Green, and Zachary really is an amazing public servant who has made that transition. He still does a lot for his community, for the men and women in public service. He was a former Marine, and like I've heard, once a Marine, always a Marine, firefighter, and he's made that transition not only to the private sector, but also to become an entrepreneur. And I thought, what a great way to tell that story as well, because there's a lot of folks who want to take their expertise that they learned in public service and then translate that into their own business. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Zachary Green. Zachary, how you doing?
Doing great, Eric and Jody. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a true honor.
Yeah, no, the honor is all ours. And like I mentioned, this show's all about you, Zachary. I gave pretty much a high-level intro, but I'd like for you to just, take some time and kind of walk us through that journey. And along the way, if there's any tips and any guidance that you could provide, I mean, that's what this is all about. So Zachary, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. First person in my family to join the military. Growing up, all my friends would be out riding bikes and playing soccer, and I would be covering my face with mud and turning in twigs and branches into machine guns and reliving battles out in the woods. And everyone thought I was crazy, and I guess you kind of have to be crazy to join the Marine Corps. But the day I turned 18, I walked right into the recruiter station. I'd been waiting my whole life for that day. I had to wait till I was 18 because my parents weren't real keen on me joining the Marine Corps. And I remember walking in and saying, hey, I've been to the Army recruiter and they told me about all the money I can get. They went to the Navy recruiter and they told me about the adventures that I could have on the high seas. And the Air Force told me all about the technical training I would get and how much of a comfortable lifestyle it is. I said, what can the Marine Corps offer me? And I'll never forget, it was Staff Sergeant Beatrice Houston, big, huge barrel-chested Marine and, small waist, big chest. And he kind of leaned back in his chair and he said, son, I think you got it wrong. He goes, the Marine Corps is the finest fighting force in the history of mankind, and it's going to continue to be that way. And the question is, what can you bring the Marine Corps? And that kind of threw me off a little bit. And he goes, you know what? He goes, let's just go ahead and end this conversation now. He goes, I've seen your type. He goes, you're not strong enough. There's no way you're going to be able to make it through boot camp. There's no way someone like you could do this. Now, I had a lot of struggles growing up, Eric. I had ADHD, which in school is a bad problem. But when you get out of school, they call it multitasking. Then all of a sudden it becomes this great thing and everybody loves it. But I bounced around to like 6 or 7 schools and was always being told by teachers and other classmates that I wasn't going to amount to anything and I wasn't good enough. And I played 4 varsity sports, football, wrestling, shot put, ice hockey. And I felt I was tough. And all of a sudden this Marine's telling me I'm not good enough. And I showed him, I grabbed that contract right out of his hand and I signed it right there on the spot. And all of a sudden, here I am in Parris Island, South Carolina, and not a very pleasant place to be. And I remember going through the first couple of weeks of receiving when you're in boot camp. And, it wasn't that bad. It was starting to get a little stressful. But then the day that you actually meet your drill instructors show up, and literally and figuratively, all hell breaks loose for the next couple of weeks. And I remember going through those first couple of weeks and I was struggling. I was used to being a good athlete, captain on my hockey team and doing well in that area. And I realized I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And it wasn't that I wasn't good, it's just everybody else that was down there was so good. And I remember there was an incident that happened on the drill deck, and I was having a problem with my rifle, and my drill instructor leaned down on me and whispered in my ears. He said, "I knew you weren't going to be able to make it, and your mommy's not here to save you this time." And for me, that was kind of my crucible. That was my dark moment. That was the moment when I lost it. So I dropped to my knees, started crying. I was crushed. And it was that crucible that I'll go back to this when I talk a little bit more about my business. When everything gets dark and you kind of look into that abyss and it looks back at you and you make a decision, am I going to go ahead and fight through this and use all those things that have driven me to this point and all that adversity that has shaped my character and the grit, the keyword grit, to make me who I am, or am I going to quit? And I made a decision at that point. I was going to be a Marine. I was going to be a warrior. And no matter what anybody told me, I was going to accomplish. And that was kind of my bottom. And everybody has to go through that bottom in recruit training. And from that point on, I just kind of grew up, ended up graduating in one of the top 10, top 20% of the platoon. Went on to officer candidate school in Quantico, which is even more physically challenging than recruit training was at the Paris Island. Ended up graduating top of my platoon there. And it was all that intangibles and that driven of that adversity I had that it shaped me into the Marine that I am and the warrior that I ultimately became. So this was in 91 to like 97. It was during the Clinton years. The military was being a lot of contrition. There was 0 combat deployments for the Marines at that time. And I basically didn't feel that sense of purpose anymore. And I went ahead and got out of the Marine Corps, got married, started my career in the civilian world. And then all of a sudden, September 11th happened. You know, it's a day that defined our country and defined myself, and I'm sure all of you guys too. And I realized that sense of purpose was missing so strongly because my brother and sister warriors were out there taking the fight to these enemies that had the gall to attack us. And I was getting fat and living on expense reports and traveling all over the place, and it just didn't sit right with me. So I realized that the forward edge of the battle area, the FIBA as we call it in the infantry, was no longer some far off distant desert. It's our backyard. And I joined our local volunteer fire department, and I had my sense of purpose back. I had a chance to experience what it's like to be part of a team, a part of something that's bigger than you. And I always said, in the Marine Corps, we take stuff that was really fun and made it as miserable as possible. And in the fire service, we took stuff that was really miserable and tried to make it as fun as possible. So during this time, I had a very successful career at Eli Lilly in the pharmaceutical business. I started out in sales, worked my way up to sales training, sales management, and eventually on a brand and development team. And I learned the core principle of branding and marketing, and that is it's not about features and benefits. It's about solving problems. And when you look at all the medications and the things that we sold out there, let's take, for example, diabetes. We didn't talk about what's in insulin. We talked about the problems if you have low blood sugar or diabetes and how insulin can solve those problems by regulating your blood sugars and so on and so forth. And that all kind of culminated in one of my very first live fire trainings. I'm pushing down a dark hallway. I've got my 80 pounds of bunker gear, my helmet on. I can't see my hand in front of my face because it's so black. And I realize I'm lost. And there's a primal fear of the darkness. This isn't like the boogeyman or Dracula. This is where you truly, are horrified to your core. And being lost in a dark building with 80 pounds of gear that reduces your dexterity and your agility, and knowing you've got 20 minutes of air left and you're dead because the room's filling up with this black smoke. And I realized I wasn't in a hallway. I was actually in a walk-in closet, and I was trapped. So I remember what they taught me during training at fire school. I found my way out of the building, and I got up and I started talking to my captain, and I was telling him how scared I was, and he starts making fun of me. And he's like, "Look, bro," he's like, "that's the way this works in the fire service. You have to get used to it being dark and not being able to find your way around." And it just didn't sit right with me. There's a million something firefighters in the United States, and we're saying this is how it's supposed to be. It's dark, and you just kind of find your way around. So I started researching different technologies that I could use as a firefighter to increase accountability and reduce disorientation. In the military, we had a concept called the fog of war, which is you can have all the plans in the world, but as soon as the smoke starts to fill up the area and the artillery sets in and the confusion sets in, you get this both literal and figurative fog. I wanted to try to figure out how can I kind of orient myself in that dark building. And I remembered this photoluminescent technology that we had in the Marine Corps. It was on the back of the Kevlar helmets, those little cat eyes. I was like, what if I could apply that same technology to firefighter helmets? And I found a way to get the technology to glow really bright and really long and wore it on my helmet. And sure enough, a week or two later, we catch a fire and I'm pushing down the hallway and I feel a guy try to pull my helmet off of my head. Well, I turn around and do naturally what anybody would do. I get ready to deck the guy and I can see the green glow off of my helmet reflecting off of his face mask. I'm pointing at the ceiling, which is on fire, and asking him to go ahead and use his hose and put, as we call, the wet stuff on the red stuff and get the damn fire put out. He's pointing at my helmet saying, what is this green glow? This is amazing. And we finally get out, get the fire knocked down. We get outside and everyone's talking about all they could see was this green glow on this helmet. And they realized it was me, and guys start throwing $20 bills at me. And next, I make a couple $100 making these little prototypes. And then the neighboring chief calls me up and he asks for a couple dozen, and I make another couple dozen. And over the next 6 months, I start driving from fire station to fire station, selling these glow in the dark helmet bands out of the trunk of my car. And at a certain point, my fire chief sat me down. He said, Zach, what you've got is revolutionary. You are solving a problem that is dog-man from the beginning of time. How do you see in the dark? And you're helping with the firefighters. He goes, you got to get more serious about this, not just use this as a hobby. It was interesting because right about that time, Eli Lilly was starting to do some layoffs, and it turned out that I was eligible for kind of a buyout program where they were going to pay me 9 months of my salary if I left the company. I'm like, this is the sign that I needed. So I ended up taking the buyout. And I remember a quote that my fire chief said. He said, look, Teddy Roosevelt once said that when you're faced with a monumental decision, the best thing to do is the right thing. The next best thing to do is the wrong thing. But the worst thing you could ever do is do nothing. And I just thought, I got to do something. My fellow brother and sister firefighters, I owe it to them. So I ended up refinancing my home, maxed out my credit cards, rated my 401k, started to build some money up, build up some inventory. I went to a trade show, brought a bunch of my brother firefighters together. We've got a little pop-up tent with sidewalls held together with duct tape and zip tied next to these big, huge billion-dollar companies that have their $100,000 booths. And we had a line of 100-something people for all 3 days of the trade show. These other booths had spent $100,000 and hired the pretty models and had all the bells and whistles and strobe lights going off. They had maybe 20 people. We had 100 people in this little tiny booth trying to see what's inside this dark tent because we had to simulate the darkness. We booked $100,000 of business in 3 days. And the Marine in me said, okay, I'm going to accomplish this mission no matter what. The logical businessman in me said, I can't take orders for stuff that I can't produce because there's no way I have enough money to produce that much or buy that much raw material, let alone fill those orders. But in the Marine Corps, mission accomplishment comes first, no matter what. It comes above troop welfare. And I found a way to get those orders produced. And one thing led to another. And we have over 80,000 firefighters in 25 countries using our products. That eventually worked our way into doing a Shark Tank, not the show on TV. We did kind of a private version. I raised a couple $1 million in venture capital financing to talk about not just helping firefighters, but helping civilians. Came up with a whole line of glow-in-the-dark exit signs that don't need batteries or light bulbs. And I'm proud to say we now have 3 of the nation's 4 largest retailers using it that owe close to $10 million a year in sales now. And if it wasn't for what I learned in the Marine Corps and what happened to me during my personal crucible of seeing that dark abyss and realizing I can either fight my way through this and use all that adversity and all those challenges that happen to help get through this, or I can quit. Because if you're a warrior, you never quit, ever. And there's so many things we learn in the military. What's important is not your job training. It's the intangibles. It's the brotherhood. It's the purpose. It's integrity. It's commitment. It's courage. It's dedication. It's confidence. It's being bold. It's my favorite word of all time, grit. That's really what you need to think about as you transfer out of the military and look at either going into the private sector or being foolish enough like myself and actually becoming an entrepreneur.
Wow. Zachary, that's an incredible story. I mean, I could sit here and listen to you all day. And that's, there's so much you can pick up out of your journey, mission driven. That's something that, resonated. Determination, never give up. And then, like you said, just absolute grit and those intangibles that I believe is what really separate folks that are in public service from many others is just, the minute they raised their hand and said, I'm going to put other people before myself. I mean, it says so much about them and their quality. I bet you there's a lot of people, their minds are going right now. They're thinking, I had an experience similar to that in which something that they did or something that they're doing now could translate into a potential business opportunity down the road. What type of advice would you give somebody who's thinking of doing what you did and following in your footsteps?
So I always talk to aspiring entrepreneurs and I tell them you got to answer 3 questions before you can really put your business plan together. And these 3 questions really are your business plan. The first question you ask yourself is, have I solved a problem in a unique and elegant way? What does that mean? Don't just make something to make something. Make something again to solve that problem. Number 2, you have to have an unfair business advantage. Think of the whole concept of David and Goliath. If David fought fair, so to speak, and he did what Goliath asked him to do, David would have been ripped to shreds. But what David did is he had an unfair advantage, and that was his speed, his agility, and his ability to think out of the box and use that rock and that sling. And we need to think that we're all Davids going up against the Goliaths of the world. So what is an unfair advantage? So an unfair advantage may be you've created I'm just going to make something up. You've created a special coffee cup that is cheaper and better for the environment and whatever. But you know what? Anybody else could do that. But your unfair advantage may be, I went to Starbucks and I got them to not only commit to buying 100,000 of these cups, but they also said they're not going to buy any of the other technology out there that's similar to mine. That's an unfair advantage. Another unfair advantage is using your veteran background. There are some really incredible opportunities out there, both in the private sector and in the public sector, that you can use as a veteran-owned business, or even if you're a service-disabled veteran-owned business, there's even more. That gives you an unfair advantage. I believe in integrity, but I don't believe in fighting fair. In the Marine Corps, they taught us you never, ever fight fair. Only stupid people fight fair. We will not fight if it's one-on-one. We want to come in there with tanks and helicopters and outnumber the enemy 10-1 before we're going to fight. So think of that mentality, that unfair advantage and what you can come up with. And then the third one is you've got to have really good sales, marketing, and distribution. Because you can have the greatest idea in the world, the greatest product in the world, but if nobody knows about it, nobody has the ability to buy it, and you have no ability to actually distribute it, you're not going to be that successful. So for a lot of people that like to tinker in their garage and they come up with an idea, and I say, that's great. Can you make 1,000 of them? And they think for a second, like, okay, yeah, I can. Okay, well, where are you going to get the money to buy the raw material to make those 1,000? And you're in your garage. You're going to need to rent out space in a warehouse. And by the way, that warehouse is not going to give you that space for free. They're going to want their money up front. So how do we solve that? Okay. The next thing to think about is, okay, what if we want to make 100,000 of them? Now we got to probably outsource it to a whole entire another type of company. Are we going to have quality control? So those are the things you need to think about, not just solving the problem, not just having that unfair business advantage, but that sales, marketing, and distribution is so key. The other thing, Eric, I'll tell you, so many people get so worried about someone copying their ideas and they got to get a patent. Well, I will tell you, patents are almost worthless for an entrepreneur unless you have hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can get a patent for $5,000 or $10,000, but a patent is only worth the amount of money you're willing to spend to defend that patent. And if a big company decides they want to copy your patent and you sue them, you're looking at $50,000 to $100,000 a month times 12 to 18 months to litigate that out. So unless you've got that kind of money on that patent, it doesn't matter. I'd rather have you spend that money on the patent on Facebook marketing, on building a community, building a brand, trying to find a way to get your story out there, helping to beef up your distribution. So I don't care if someone copies your idea. I know it hurts because it's your idea, but what you need to know is that you've got better sales, marketing, and distribution, because that's how you're always going to beat somebody.
Yeah, that's really good advice. This show is always about motivating and helping our public servants, transition. But that story and that advice, I've learned a lot about how to do business too. So no, I appreciate that. And I just glanced over your background. I mean, you do coaching, you do career development coaching, you do public speaking. I want to just kind of end the episode kind of in this direction. Let's say that you've just finished giving some event and you're about to jump on the elevator and there's a public servant who has watched your TED's talk or who has read something that you've written, and you only got 20 floors and this person comes up and asks you, hey, Zachary, I'm just about to leave the service and it's kind of scary for me. What type of advice can you give me? What's that one thing you want to get across to these men and women?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems we have right now is both with our veterans and with our current serving warriors is suicide. And I will tell you that you need to have a sense of purpose when you get out of the military. It's very easy to have a sense of purpose when you're in the military. It can be difficult when you get out. So whatever you do, be passionate about what you do, have a sense of purpose, give back, find other veterans out in that community that you can start to build your new squads with and be able to get out there and be able to know that you are now still serving. You're no longer serving in a uniform. You're serving in a different uniform as a civilian. You have a sense of purpose in being a taxpayer and trying to help other people. And just find something that you're passionate about. Find a problem that you can solve. And again, take care of your mental health in addition to your physical health. Stay active, stay moving, and get involved with organizations like Team RWB and these other type of great veteran organizations that help you be around other like-minded vets so you can, still be part of that unit, even though you've lost your opportunity to serve as an active duty serviceman.
Zachary, this was such a great conversation. You were the perfect fit for the first spotlight. And one thing that I took out of this that I think is important for humble servants to hear is how the lessons you learned in the Marine Corps is what got you through where maybe a civilian would have given up and said, no, there's too much. This obstacle is too big. But to you, mission came first and you found a way. And look at all the people that you've helped. I just love your story.
Well, I really appreciate it. I'm excited to announce that I'm in the process of writing my first book, and it's called The Warrior Entrepreneur. And the book is all based on exactly what you said, Jody. And that is the warriors see an advantage or they see adversity and they lean forward and they go into it because they want that challenge. And people that aren't warriors are going to get crushed by that challenge. And what you have getting out of the military, what you bring to the table is so much more than any 4-year degree, any technical college or anything. It's that warrior spirit that, adversity helps shape you. That grit is what's going to let you know that you're going to accomplish that mission no matter what anything happens in front of you.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to reading that book. Eric, this was a great first spotlight, so I'm so glad you brought Zachary on. And Zachary, thank you for being willing to be the first one that is in the spotlight. You have such a great story.
Gentlemen, thank you for all you do for our veterans. It really means a lot to me.
Thanks, Zachary. Thanks again.
Zachary, your story is so inspiring. I know people are going to want to get in touch, talk to you, at least find out what you're up to. How can they do that? How can they get in touch or see what you're doing?
Great. The best way to get a hold of me is just shoot me a text message. My phone number is 513-235-6383. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, just Zachary Green in Cincinnati. And then between those two, those are great. I also, you can email me directly at Zachary L. Green, that's Zachary, middle initial L, Green like the color, at gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zachary. And Eric, it was great to do another episode with you. And thank you so much. And thank you for listening to the Humble Servant Podcast.